Hello, and welcome to an episode that talks about development. I'm Swati Singh, a media professional for the last 12 years, specialized in mass communication. I have worked as a media professional with the Hindustan Times, the Indian Express, Career Launchers, Times of India, etc. And I've also taught mass media in various universities and colleges, including the Delhi University. Today, we shall be discussing about development. We will try to understand the meaning, need, and significance of development. Development is a constant and continuous process. It is a process that creates growth, progress, positive change, or the addition of physical, economic, environmental, social, and demographic components. So let's start first by discussing the objectives of this episode. The objectives of this lesson are to learn about the concept of development, to learn about different types of development, to understand the classification of world in terms of first world, second world, and third world countries, to learn about various indicators of development, to understand what makes a country a third world country, to learn about Human Development Index, to discuss Gender Inequality Index. Now, the purpose of development is a rise in the level and quality of life of a population and the creation or expansion of local regional income and employment opportunities without damaging the resources of the environment. The meaning and concept of development is that development means improvement in a country's economic and social conditions. More specifically, it refers to improvements in the way of managing an area's natural and human resources. In order to create wealth and improve upon people's life, every country needs to develop. Dudley Sears, while elaborating on the meaning of development, suggests that while there can be value judgments on what is development and what is not, it should be a universally acceptable aim of development to make for conditions that lead to a realization of the potential of human personality. Sears outlined several conditions that can make for achievement of this aim, which include the capacity to obtain physical necessities, particularly food. Next, a job, not necessarily paid employment, but including studying, working on a family, farm, or keeping house. Equality, which should be considered an objective in its own right. Next is participation in the government, that could be through adult franchise and voting. Belonging to a nation that is truly independent, both economically and politically. And lastly, adequate educational level literacy. The people are held to be the principal actors in human scale development, respecting their diversity as well as the autonomy of the spaces in which people must act, converts the present day object person to a subject person in the human scale development. Development of the variety that we have experienced has largely been a top-down approach, where there is little possibility of popular participation and decision-making. Human scale of development calls for a direct and participatory democracy, where the state gives up its traditional parentalistic and welfare role in favor of a facilitator in enacting and consolidating people's solutions. Flowing from below, empowerment of people takes development much ahead of simply combating or ameliorating poverty. In this sense, development seeks to restore or enhance the basic human capacities and capabilities and freedoms. At the same time, enable people to be the agents of their own growth and development. In the process of capitalistic development and leading national economy towards integration into foreign markets, even politically democratic states are apt to effectively exclude the vast masses from the political and economic decision making sometimes. The state itself evolves into a national oligarchy, hedged with authoritarian and bureaucratic structures and mechanisms that inhibit social participation and popular action. The limited access of the majority to social benefits and the limited character of the participation of the masses can often not be satisfactory, offset by the unsuccessful and weak redistributive policies of the government. Powerful economic interest groups set the national agenda of development, often unrepresentative of the heterogeneous and diverse nature of our civil society, making for a consolidation and concentration of power and resources in the hands of a few. Also, a focus on people and the masses implies that there could be many different roads to development and self-reliance. The slogans human-centered development, the development of the people, integrated development, and call for a more inclusive and sensitive approach to fundamental social, economic, and political changes involved in development, such that all aspects of life are of people. Their collectivity, their own history and consciousness, and the relation with others make for a balanced advancement. The adoption of a basic need approach with the concept of endogenous development makes for a development agenda that is universally applicable, while at the same time allowing for country-specific particularities to be given due account. The challenge of human-scale development is to nurture diversity instead of being threatened by it, to develop processes of political and economic decentralization to strengthen democratic indigenous transactions, traditions, and institutions, and to encourage rather than repress emerging social movements which reflect the people's need for autonomy and space. The fruits of economic development may be distributed more equitably if local spaces are protected. Micro-organizations are facilitated and the diverse collective identities that make up the social body are recognized and represented. Greater control of popular masses over environment is a must. In fact, this concept of development seeks for the civil society rather than the state to own up and nurture development so that the role of social actors is enhanced. Social and human development, therefore, necessarily requires a unified approach integrating the economic and social components in the plan, policies and programs for people's betterment. The challenge is to simultaneously integrate cross-sectoral and regional development needs as well as to make for a participative development. The issues of environment, pollution, women, habitat, hunger and employment have come to the fore only by one and continue to require public and institutional attention along with resource allocations. Two major contemporary concerns that require focus in any development initiative are that of human security and sustainability. We need to ensure that development does not mean social dislocation, violence and war, and that we meet the needs of the present generations without compromising the ability of the future generations to meet their own needs. Each of these problems is interrelated in complex ways and requires a unified approach. The purpose of development should be to develop man and not to end with the developing things. Before we move further discussing the concept of development, let us first define the three worlds: the first world countries, second world countries, and the third world countries. Now, the question arises, what are the different types of development? The different types of development are of three types: social development, economic development, and political development. Let us explain these in a little detail. We start with the social development. Social development is about improving the well-being of every individual in society so they can reach their full potential. The success of society is linked to the well-being of each and every citizen. Social development means investing in people. It requires the removal of barriers so that all citizens can journey towards their dreams with confidence and dignity. It is about refusing to accept that people who live in poverty will always be poor. It is about helping people so that they can move forward on their path to self-sufficiency. Every citizen must have the opportunity to grow, develop their own skills, and contribute to their families and communities in a very meaningful way. If they are healthy, well-educated, and trained to enter the workforce and are able to make a decent wage, they are better equipped to meet their basic needs and be successful. Their families will also do well, and the whole of society will benefit. Learning must start early in life. By investing in early learning initiatives, we can ensure a greater degree of success amongst our citizens. Making sure that children get a good start in their education goes a long way to increasing their success later in life. An affordable, high-quality childcare system is also needed for society to succeed. When people know that their children are becoming well taken care of, they can be more productive in their jobs. When employers have good employees, their businesses are more likely to succeed. When businesses succeed, the economic situation of a community is improved. An investment today is a good child care program can provide many long-term economic benefits for the society. In addition, a safe, affordable place to live is a very important prerequisite in helping people achieve self-sufficiency. This is the focus of family life, where families can live safely, nurture their children, build community relationships, and care for aging parents. Without a decent place to live, it is difficult to function as a productive member of the society. Other investments in people that contribute to the economic prosperity of society include youth programs and services, post-secondary education, job creation, promotion of healthy, active living, and safe and secure communities. Now let's talk about the economic development. Economic development is the creation of wealth from which community benefits are realized. It is more than job programs. It is an investment in growing your economy and enhancing the prosperity and quality of life for all the residents. From a public perspective, local economic development involves the allocation of limited resources, that is land, labor, and capital, and entrepreneurship in a way that it has positive effect on the levels of business activity, employment generation, income distribution patterns, and fiscal solvency. It is a process of deliberate intervention in the normal economic growth by making it easier or more attractive. Today, communities in California, for example, are giving attention to what they can do to promote fiscal stability and greater economic development. Political development, let's talk about that. Political development has been defined in very many ways that reflect the passage of societies and analyst preoccupations. One formulation dwells on the emergence of the national sovereignty and that integrity of the state, demanding respect and upholding commitments in the international system. Others identify the domestic attributes of constitutional order and political stability attained through the formation of a settled framework of government, reliable procedures for leadership succession, and a consolidation of the territorial administrative reach of the government institutions. Now, let's start with the definitions. Let's start with the first world countries. The bloc of democratic industrialized countries within American sphere of influence are the first world, also known as the West. The second world countries are the eastern bloc of the communist socialist states, where the political and economic power should come from the up to now oppressed peasants and workers. The third world countries are the remaining 3/4 of the world population countries that do not belong to either of the blocs when considered third world. First, there was the three worlds model. The origin of the terminology is unclear. In 1952, Alfred Sauvé, a French demographer, wrote an article in the French magazine La Observateur, which ended by comparing the third world with the third estate. Now, let's define elaborately the first world countries. The term first world refers to the developed capitalist industrialist countries, generally aligned with NATO and the USA. The bloc of countries aligned with the United States after World War II, which had more or less common political and economic interests. This included the countries of North America and Western Europe, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. Some African countries were assigned to the First World because of their links with the Western countries. Western Sahara was a part of Spain at that time. The anti-communist apartheid regime of South Africa was until May 1961 a member of the Commonwealth, and Namibia was then known as Southwest Africa and was administered by the South Africa. Angola and Mozambique were run by the Portuguese, like companies. There were some neutral states in Europe, such as Switzerland, Sweden, Austria, Ireland, and Finland, but they can be classified as First World in this particular context. The Second World countries. This refers to the former communist, socialist, less industrialized states known as the Eastern Bloc. The countries in the sphere of influence of the Soviet Union. It included the Soviet Socialist Republic, the countries of Eastern and Central Europe, example Poland, East Germany, Czechoslovakia, and the Balkans. And there were the Asian communist states in the spheres of influence of China, Mongolia, North Korea, Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The Third World, the less developed countries known as the Third World countries, mainly underdeveloped agricultural states and nations of Africa, Asia, and Latin America, where the blessings of civilization benefited only a small ruling elite and corporations and upper classes of the former colonial powers. In principle, the term Third World is outdated but still in use today. The politically correct designations would be less developed. What makes a nation Third World, we may ask now. Nowadays, the term Third World is more often replaced by term least developed countries or low-income countries, according to the World Bank. Whatever term is used, it serves to designate countries that suffer from high poverty, high child mortality, low economic and education development, and low self-consumption of their natural resources. Countries that are vulnerable to exploitation by large corporations and industrialized nations. These are the developing and technologically less advanced nations of Asia and Africa, Oceania, and Latin America. Third world nations tend to have economic dependence on the developed countries and are generally characterized as poor with unstable governments and having high fertility rates, high gender-related illiteracy, and are prone to diseases. One of the critical factors is the lack of a middle class. There is huge impoverished population and a small elite upper class that controls the country's wealth and resources. Most third world nations also have high foreign debt levels. Now let's talk about classification of countries of the third world. Well, the third world countries classification by various indications which comprises of their political rights and civil liberties, the gross national income and the poverty of countries, the human development of countries and the freedom of information within a country. Further, we need to explore and understand the exact indicators of development. These would lend us a better insight into the reality of analysis with respect to segmentation of the countries. Let us study about the major indicators of the development. To begin with, even when there are hundreds of economic, political, and social indicators of development, there are certain prominent ones. These range from hard economic indicators such as gross national income and all its variations to various poverty and economic inequality indicators to the sustainable development goals, which focus much more on social indicators of development such as education and health, all the way down to much more subjective development indicators such as happiness. We shall be discussing few important selected indicators to try and represent. The most commonly used indicators collected by some of the major development institutions, both multilateral agencies such as the World Bank as well as NGOs. The indicators you need to know for the indicators of development topic must obviously be the GNP, the HDI and the MDGs. Other indicators which are useful to know for different subtopics within the global development course is health, education, gender, conflict, the environment, etc. Taken together, these indicators should provide enough breadth of measurements to gain a very good, in fact an A-level standard insight into the level of development of a country, without resulting in information overload and mental meltdown. Most of the above indicators we have talked about have been developed and are monitored by either the World Bank or the United Nations. The indicators to be considered in more detail are total nominal gross domestic product, gross national income per capita, the percentage of people living on less than $1.25 a day, the percentage of people living below the poverty line within a country, the unemployment rate, the Human Development Index score, progress inwards to Sustainable Development Goals, school enrollment ratios, PISA educational achievement rankings, percentage of population in tertiary education, the infant mortality rate, healthy life expectancy, gender inequality index, the Global Peace Index, total military expenditure of a country, carbon dioxide emissions, the corruption index and the happiness index. Nominal gross national income. Nominal gross national income is the total economic value of domestic and foreign output by the residents of a country. It is roughly worked out like this. The gross national income, which is gross domestic product plus the factor incomes earned by the foreign residents minus the income earned in the domestic economy by the non-residents. Nominal gross national income rankings. We're talking about this in 2015. This list would showcase the first one was USA, that is United States of America, which stood at that time at $17 trillion. Second was China, stood at $10 trillion. At number 6 was United Kingdom, which stood at $2.8 trillion. And number 7th in the world was India at that time with $2.0 trillion economy. Nominal GNI is useful for giving you an idea of the economic clout of a country's compared to another country. The real global power players in terms of military expenditure are all towards the top of this. These figures, however, tell you very little about the quality of life in a country. For that, you need to divide the figure per head of a population and factor in the cost of living in the country. Now, let's come to the gross national income per capita. The gross national income per capita is the GNI divided by the population of a country. So, it's GNI per person. The PPP stands for Purchasing Power Parity, which alters the raw GNI per capita data to control for the different cost of living in a country, thus modifying the GNI figures in US dollars to reflect what those dollars would actually buy given the different cost of living in different countries. The percentage of people living on less than $1.25 in a day. There are still around 800 million people around the world living on less than $1.25 a day. The figures for some of these countries are below. The Democratic Republic of Congo, which has 88% of people, Bangladesh with 47%, India 26% and China 6% of such people. Looking at absolute poverty, statistics like these give us a much fuller understanding of the lack of development in certain countries. In DRC, you can clearly see that the poverty is endemic. Absolute poverty is a significant problem in many sub-Saharan African countries. And we can also see that absolute poverty is still a significant problem in India, mainly the rural India. And while the 6% is quite low in China, the 6% represents tens of millions of people living there, given the large overall population of China. Proportion of population living below the poverty line within a country. The US Sustainable Development Goal states that one of its aims under Goal 1 is to reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women and children of all ages living in poverty and all its dimensions according to national definitions. The United Nations collects its data from countries with lower human development, but not for countries with high human development. And so, here we are reliant on data from national governments or other agencies, and the problem here is that different countries measure their poverty line in different ways. So, this means making cross-national comparisons are very difficult. Selected status on the proportion of people living below the country's own poverty line. Most low-income countries with high absolute poverty rates register a percentage of between 30 to 60% people living below their own poverty lines. The USA has 15% of its population living below its poverty line, a household income of around $24,000 per annum. The United Kingdom also has around 15% of this population living below the poverty line, although its line is much higher than the United States, around $30,000 more. Also, we need to understand the other such elements that define development. We start with the Human Development Index. The Human Development Index is complemented and compiled annually by the United Nations and gives countries a score based on their GNI per capita, number of years of actual and expected schooling and life expectancy, or in the words of the UN itself, the SDI is a composite index measuring average achievement and three basic dimensions of human development, which is a long and healthy life, knowledge and a decent standard of living. The Gender Inequality Index. The United Nations defines the Gender Inequality Index as a composite measure reflecting inequality in achievement between women and men in three-dimension reproductive health, empowerment and labor market. More specifically, it gives countries a score between 0 to 1, similar to the HDI based on the maternal mortality ratio, which is an important indicator, especially related to mother's health and mother's life in a particular nation at childbirth. This connotes the number of deaths due to pregnancy-related causes per 1 lakh live births, the $cent birth rate. Number of births to women aged 15 to 19 per 1,000 women aged 15 to 19, proportion of seats held by women in the national parliament expressed as percentage of the total seats. The proportion of the female population compared to the male population with at least some secondary education. The comparative labor force participation rate for men and women. Gender Inequality Index rankings. Well, the obvious strength of this is that we get to compare the life chances of women in a country to those of men. What may be surprising to you is that while there does appear to be general correlation between high GNI per capita and high human development, low gender inequality, the correlation is not perfect, as is evident by the United States of America being just one place above Saudi Arabia and Ghana being just a few places above India, despite these two pairs of countries having quite divergent levels of human index development. Now let's talk about the conclusion. Development is visible and useful, not necessarily immediately, and includes an aspect of quality change and the creation of conditions for a continuation of that change. Fulfillment of basic needs of mankind should be the true objectives of development, an achievement that either do not contribute to this goal or even disrupt this basic requirement must not be pursued as a development goal. And now it's time for a quick recap. Today we discussed the meaning of development, we further talked about the different types of development, and we also discussed the various indicators of development, the concept of first world, second world and the third world countries. Next, we learned about the meaning and usage of the Human Development Index and Gender Inequality Index as well. So, we understood that there are very many parameters which decide the development of a nation. To sum it up, we learned that development was beyond success. It is more to do with improved quality of life and growth for the current and future generations. This is all we have for you today. Hope you enjoyed the session. We shall be back with more episodes on development. Until then, take care. Thank you and namaskar.